right, we are live. Hello and welcome to the Undisputed MMA show presented by the FTN Network. My name is Jonah Shiffman. I'm joined, as I am every week here on the show, by my co-host John Kelly. We're going to be talking UFC 270 going down this Saturday night in Anaheim, California. We got a heavyweight main event, a title unifying bout between the interim champion Ciryl Gane and then the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, Francis Ngannou. We also got a fight for the flyweight title in the co-main event. The trilogy will be completed between current champion Brandon Moreno and Davison Figueiredo. We got 13 fights on tap for this weekend. A lot of big prize pools across the DFS sites. A couple of spots that I think look juicy for betting. John, before we get into the fights, my man, how are you doing and how are you feeling going into the first pay-per-view of 2022?
I'm feeling really good, man. This is a fun card. First of all, a lot of Dana White Contender Series fighters, so I love that. But also, I just think it's a good card for props. Like, I'm going to have a lot of just small sprinkles on a lot of different long shot props. So I feel like I'm getting back to my old ways here. So these are the type of cards I have a lot of fun with. I have a lot of action out. I have a lot of bets, and hopefully we can have a big night here. They're typically the cards where I either have a lot of tweets, a lot of action in the Twitter streets from all the bets, or it's a one of the cards where I just get completely wiped out, like that Edson Barbosa Giga Chikadze card from a while back. So it's one of those where, you got to risk it to get the biscuit, but I'm definitely excited. It's a fun card and excited for Saturday.
And of course, the pay-per-views are at the biggest risk of you falling asleep in the middle of it with the late start time. I think it's
always.
I think it's 10 o'clock Eastern this weekend. Had a decent first week of the year. You hit on Jamie Pickett, which was your biggest conviction play, obviously, of the slate. So hopefully we can keep that rolling. A bunch of Contender Series fighters on this card, which is a theme I think we'll talk about probably throughout the majority of quarter one for the UFC, but especially this weekend. I think I saw a tweet of yours earlier today, John. Like, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think the first 6 fights or something like that have a Contender Series alum in them. A lot of those guys are making their debut this weekend, so we will we'll certainly be sure to touch on the Contender Series appearances they had, and then kind of see how they'll fare going forward in the UFC as they kind of take a step up in competition, reaching the big show. Let's get started here. We do have 13 fights to break down. Our first fight features Kay Hansen as a minus 225 favorite. She's $8,800 on Draftkings since Jasmine Jasvidikas. I think I botched the name, but maybe I'll get it the second time around. She's plus 185, 7.4K. It's funny because I actually watched her Contender Series fight earlier today. We're doing the show a day earlier than usual. We're doing it on Wednesday night this week, so content will be out a little bit longer for those of you guys listening in podcast form, video form, and then everyone joining us live. Of course, appreciate you guys being with us on a short notice Undisputed show here on a Wednesday night. But I was watching her fight earlier today, one on Contender Series, certainly a grappler first. John, I'll let you do the majority of the breakdown here in terms of Jasmine, someone who I think you've put probably more research time into than myself. Her opponent here, Kay Hansen, 1-1 in the UFC. I would call it a controversial 1-1. I think there's a pretty good argument to be made that she could be 2-0 inside the UFC. She's a grappler primarily. She always proactively grapple. She attempted, I think, 11 takedowns in her first UFC fight, got the fight to the floor multiple times in her second UFC fight as well. I think this is an interesting matchup because we got two fighters who are primarily grapplers, and something that I think will become a talking point throughout the week as we, on a pay-per-view week, we have all these media appearances. We've got we'll have the press conference tomorrow between all the fighters. And then we've got a big weigh-in show on Friday. One of those things where I think as the week goes on, a talking point that will eventually come up here is the size discrepancy between these two fighters. Kay Hansen is 5'2". She's at a 5-inch height and reach disadvantage in this matchup after fighting someone in Corey McKenna, who's a smaller girl for this weight class. I think that'll be interesting to monitor as the week goes on. I think Hansen as a favorite makes sense in this spot. I actually thought before going in and doing the tape, I thought that I might have a bet on Kay Hansen, but as I start doing a little bit more work on this card, I think Hansen will be the smaller fighter, although more skilled, a little bit more well-rounded. I'll pick her to win the first fight of the UFC 270, but certainly could use a little extra help in the analysis department. John, anything for you here on the first fight of the night?
Yeah, no action for me. I do think the line is a little bit wide here. I agree with you that Kay Hansen should be a favorite, but when you see her at like minus 225, that's where, you kind of put the hand up like, all right, I think we might be getting carried away here. Like, she's not a bad fighter, but just somebody, at that price tag who I have a lot of concerns with. Her boxing is not great. Her defensive striking is pretty poor. She's kind of a punching bag on the feet. You mentioned she's definitely more of a grappler. At least we know she's aggressive in trying to get the fight to the mat. But she's not like super great with her wrestling. Her jiu-jitsu is okay for the division, but You mentioned the size difference. That's a concern as well. And then on the flip side, like if I think the line's wide, maybe I want to take a dog shot on Jasuda Vicious, but I'm really not interested, to be honest with you. Like I taped her quite a bit on Contender Series. I picked her to win that fight. She did win that fight, but it really wasn't pretty. And that was against a one-dimensional striker in Pilastri. You saw in the third round, she faded quite a bit. You know, she was eating a ton of jabs. She's a punching bag in her own right. You know, her defensive striking needs a little bit of work. She trains up at Niagara Top Team, but also splits camps, usually at Syndicate MMA in Vegas. And that's where I think she spent the whole camp this time around. But you mentioned it, you know, she definitely has a couple takedowns that she'll go to, really strong in the clinch. That's really her best asset, I think, is she has some really vicious knees in the clinch, and she's always looking for that Muay Thai clinch. So I think that's where maybe she could have a little bit of success against Hansen, but I don't think she'll be able to muscle Hansen to the ground. I don't think she'll be able to out grapple Hansen. So it's like I'm kind of just relying on her to be the better striker. And when I know that she probably fades at, in the third round, and she's not like a super great striker as it is. Yes, she has the reach advantage, but I just feel like it's probably a competitive fight where Kay Hansen maybe takes it 29-28 on the basis that she's a better grappler.
Yeah, the thing, one last thing before we move on to the second fight of the night, just watching that Contender Series fight back for Jasmine. She eats a head kick, I think, in round 2 or maybe towards the end of round 1. Not like a massive moment for her opponent, but she's outstruck at distance in that fight, like 60-37. And if you contextualize that a little bit, she was facing someone who's much smaller than her, a Brazilian girl who's just kind of moving forward like a zombie the whole time. And of course, that's going to lead to her landing more strikes because she was just marching Jasmine down towards the end of the third round. But I do think that Kay Hansen has a striking advantage in the spot. I kind of just think she's better everywhere. So it sounds like we're both picking Kay Hansen to get the dub here in the first fight of the night. Let's move on to the second fight of the night, which is also featuring a debuting fighter coming off of Contender Series. That is Genaro Valdez. He's a plus 160 favorite here. He's $7,500 on DraftKings. And he takes on Matt Frevola. Matt Frevola coming off of a first-round knockout loss to Terrence McKinney in Terrence McKinney's UFC debut. It was a shot that put him down in, I think, 7 seconds there. But Frevola comes into the spot. He's a minus 190 favorite. He's $8,700 on DraftKings. Seems like a decent bounce back spot for him. But again, he's taking on a prospect here who we don't know a ton about. We obviously saw him on Contender Series. Look at his record. Valdez is a perfect 10-0. I believe all 10 wins have come inside the distance. A guy who closed. And I think this is something interesting to talk about when we talk about all these Contender Series fighters. Valdez closed like minus 2,000 on Contender Series. I mean, in some places there was some serious steam. I think the highest it got was minus 2,300. I mean, when you get to that point in MMA, it's like a 99 to 97 to 99% chance of win probability according to the market. And at lower level of MMA, it's a little bit crazy. So certainly with some market respect for Valdez, fight was actually pretty close, which Sean, I'll let you touch on, but I wasn't that impressed with him on Contender Series. Gets the W regardless, gets the contract 10-0. I think it's a tough test for him this weekend against Matt Frevola. Certainly a step up in competition, but curious your thoughts here on Frevola versus Valdez.
Yeah, you said you weren't that impressed with him. I wasn't impressed with him at all either. Like I was honestly like kind of discouraged with the performance on Contender Series because going into that fight, I thought he was going to roll and look like he was minus 2,000 against Patrick White, and it just didn't happen. Like and I think he opened at like minus 350 or something. Those lines get a little wonky, and they have some lower limits, early opener stuff. So you can't put too much basis into that. But the guy he fought was basically a nobody, fighting on, I think, the Alaskan regional scene. I haven't looked at Patrick White in a while, so you might fact check me on that. But I think he was one of the Alaskan regional scenes guy, hadn't fought anybody, didn't look good really at all. And I thought Valdez had a clear grappling edge there, and he just didn't even look for it. Like he went life and death with Patrick White. They were both swinging like crazy. I mean, not technical whatsoever. Guys just completely gassed out after emptying the tank on each other. No defense, just all winging bombs at each other. Super sloppy fight. And he was actually like on his way to losing that fight, I think. And then he ended up just landing the big shot that ended up putting White out. So kind of a come from behind, sort of lucky performance there in a fight that he should have looked like a big favorite. So I have concerns with Genaro Valdez. He does have an okay skill set, but if that's the way that he's going to fight, and he's historically a guy that's kind of been a front runner anyway, then he's drawing pretty thin here to where he has to get an early finish. And that's possible against a guy like Matt Frevola. We've seen him knocked out twice in the first round. That durability is always a concern. But outside of him losing early, I think Frevola really has his way here, especially in the second and third round. Outside of round one, if he doesn't get knocked out, I think Frevola gets the job done here. So we'll go with Matt Frevola by decision, but I'll have a little bit of exposure to Valdez just in case he does get that early finish on DraftKings, because you're going to want that type of upside if he ends up hitting that early window.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. You look at Valdez, I mean, pushed a really, really, really hard pace through the first minute of that Contender Series fight. Obviously led to him slowing down big time. Gets the win at the beginning of round two, regardless. But I think we both agree it was not an impressive performance. I will say the drawback here on Matt Frevola, I think he's clearly the more skilled fighter. I think anyone who's taping this fight, doing the work on this fight, understands that Matt Frevola is just simply a better martial artist than Valdez. The issue with Matt Frevola, man, is this guy is fragile. Like, we look at his UFC run, knocked out by Marco Polo Reyes, Lando Venata draw where he's knocked down twice. Luis Pena put him in a few tough spots, a guy who's not really known for hurting his opponents on the feet. And then obviously the Terrence McKinney knockout in his last loss. Like, Matt Frevola gets hurt in a lot of fights. And while I think he probably has enough to weather a storm here from Valdez, it's interesting. Like, Valdez has gotten by mostly on grappling, honestly, but I think that's against a lot lower level competition grapplers than Matt Frevola. I think Frevola will be way stronger than this guy, have better cardio. So I'm kind of tempted, honestly, to lay the price on Matt Frevola at minus 190. Like, I feel like in terms of the skill level here, he can cover way more than minus 190. I think Frevola could look like a massive favorite. It just comes down to how often does he get hurt here. And we know in the past that Matt Frevola is someone who's a little bit tough to lay a minus 190, minus 200 number on. Another look that I think would be interesting here is the under. It's taken a little bit of money early in the week. Open to lower limits like minus 105, minus 115 in places. I've seen it as high as minus 140 now in the under 2.5 rounds here. Kind of just expect Valdez to come out rampant pace. Frevola is going to be able to defend some early takedowns. I think the striking, I favor Frevola, and I kind of just think they're going to swing and put on a show for the fans. So should be a fun fight. Certainly looking forward to that one. A few fights on the undercard here, which I expect to be bangers. John, I know you feel similarly. Card that is mostly built around the two title fights towards the top. I think a little bit underwhelming of a pay-per-view, but there's certainly some fights that I think are flying under the radar on like these early prelims that are going to end up being a lot of fun. So we'll get to those kind of as they come here. We got 11 fights left. Let's move on to the third fight of the evening, where we got Vanessa Demopolis. She's a minus 135 favorite here against Silviana Gomez Juarez, who's plus 115. 7.9K is the price for Juarez on DraftKings. Demopolis is $8,300 on DK. John, I mentioned there were some fights coming up that I thought would be kind of under the radar bangers. I'm not sure if this is one of the ones I was referring to. Demopolis UFC debut against JJ Aldrich. I was there live, basically got her ass kicked for the entirety of 3 rounds, was lucky to make a decision. In my opinion, she's fought, Lupe Godinez in the past. I believe she's fought Sam Hughes, has fought a decent level of competition. Flaws for Demopolis as a favorite in this spot. Pretty bad takedown defense. She plays jiu-jitsu off her back, has virtually no get-up game. Someone like JJ Aldrich was happy to stay on top of her for over a round in that fight. Gomez Juarez, on the other hand, 0-1, also lost to Lupe Godinez in her UFC debut. Made her look like Habib. I mean, Juarez is mostly a kickboxer, has decent kicks at range, but man, her grappling seems to be really poor based on the tape we've seen. There's a little bit of a question mark going into her debut. I think me and you on the show kind of referenced, grappling doesn't look great, but we're not entirely sure how much of a judgment we can make off of it. And look, I'm ready to say the judgment on Juarez's ground game is it's pretty poor. So I expect Demopolis to have a big grappling advantage in this spot. At first, before looking into the fight deeper, I thought that Demopolis would maybe have a stand-up advantage, but I do think that Juarez's kicks are pretty decent. I think she's the better kickboxer in this fight, but just kind of comes down to low-level women's MMA. I'll favor Demopolis being the better grappler in a fight that's likely to hit the ground at some point. So Demopolis is the pick for me. No strong feelings. Don't think it's a great fight to target on DraftKings. Last thing I'll say before kicking it to you, John, is offshores open the props for this fight. They haven't really been opened widely across domestic sports books or anything like that, but there were some prices I saw on Demopolis submission, like plus 600, plus 700. I mean, you look at Juarez's grappling in the Godinez fight. She gets taken down, I think, 5 times in the first round, basically transitions herself into an armbar, a belly down armbar, gets herself submitted. Like, I think that there's certainly going to be opportunities for Demopolis to kind of cinch up some sort of choke or armbar, something like that. So I do think those prices are kind of interesting, plus 600, plus 700. We'll see if those stick around as the market starts to open up here, but no action for me currently on the third fight of the evening. John, anything for you here?
No, I'm still waiting on FanDuel to release the props for the prelims, but I wouldn't be opposed to that Demopolis submission at that number. I think that's fine. You mentioned the grappling concerns of Gomez Juarez. I agree with you. I think this is a fight where, we were supposed to have it last week. When I taped the fight for last week, it was around to pick him, and I was like, oh well, I kind of lean Demopolis, but I'm not super confident there, because she's a punching bag on the feet. She does have a little bit of grappling, but like you mentioned, anybody can pretty much take her down and control her, which is a concern. She likes to play off her back. A lot of her wins in LFA and on the regional scene were like come from behind submission wins, which you typically don't want to rely on. But Gomez Juarez isn't somebody that I'm impressed with either. She was supposed to fight on this season of Contender Series. She ended up pulling out of that fight because she got the call for the UFC to be the short notice fight against Godinez when that fight happened. So we would have had 6 straight fighters from Contender Series of this season, but she had to pull out of her fight on this season. But I mean, she's an okay striker. You mentioned horrible grappler. I think it's a low-level women's MMA fight where I lean Demopolis. She trains with better fighters. She's more experienced. I think she's just a little bit better, but it's not a fight that I want to have really any action on whatsoever.
Yeah, and it's a 13 fight for DFS, which means 26 fighters in the player pool. Can be a little bit more selective than we can be on some of these 9-10 fight slates like we saw last weekend. Next up, we got Tony Gravely. He's a minus 240 favorite here, $8.9 thousand against another UFC debutant. We got Simon Oliveira, plus 195, 7.3K for Oliveira in this matchup. And this seems to be a pretty binary fight to me, John. I'm sure you've done a little bit more work on Oliveira, but Tony Gravely kind of just checks out as like an analytics person who looks at a lot of stats in MMA. He kind of is just a darling, right? He lands over 5.5 takedowns per 15 minutes, super high motor, is able to get takedowns in bulk. Doesn't take a lot of damage because he spends a lot of time on top. But what I will say is when you go back and you watch his fights and you kind of mix a little bit of the science with the art of fighting, man, Tony Gravely's got some serious question marks, right? Like he doesn't spend a lot of time on top control. In order to take someone down 5 times in a fight, you've got to let them up 4 times, assuming that you finish the fight on top of them with that 5th takedown. Not someone who has great, control from top position, and also someone who tends to slow down a little bit in terms of the cardio, and also is just hittable, right? Like Tony Gravely gets hit late in fights. We saw that in his last fight out, where a fight that he looked really strong in. I actually bet him in that fight, took the L there against Nathan Maness. Looked really strong. Nathan Maness, not really known for being a power puncher, puts Tony Gravely out in the second round. Tony Gravely, just someone who I don't think is ever going to live up to his true talent, but is facing a bit of a step down in competition here. Oliveira, we'll go back and run the numbers on him in a bit, but he's 18-3 coming off a Contender Series. A lot of wins by submission, mostly early submissions, kind of in the Latin American regional scene. Hasn't faced a ton of good opponents, really anybody super noteworthy. And a lot of his wins are via guillotine choke. I will say he has a good guillotine, which I think is something, John, I'll let you touch on in your breakdown. I know you were maybe tempted to make a play here in the prop market in Gravely versus Oliveira. I'll pick Gravely to win the fight, but man, I think I'm done trusting this guy as a minus 200 or higher favorite. Any thoughts for you here, maybe in the prop market? Anything catching your eye in Gravely versus Oliveira?
Yeah, I really like this fight for a couple reasons. For starters, I think Gravely is always a really strong DraftKings play. People hate him for whatever reason because, like you said, he's kind of untrustworthy. And I think he burned me in that last spot too. I don't know if I bet him in a parlay. I think I might have had a parlay that card, and I don't parlay often, but I was like, well, Gravely's a lock. I got to get him in the parlay this week.
For some reason, I thought you had bet Maness. Like for some reason, I thought you
No,
won.
I'm not a Maness guy. I thought he lost against Johnny Muniz in his debut. I'm not a Maness guy whatsoever.
You bet Gravely by decision. I found
that's what it was. Yeah, Gravely by decision, and I mean, first time he's ever been knocked out. I'm like, come on, dude. Like I knew the submission's always a risk for him. And that's what's key in this matchup against I wish it was Charles Oliveira against Simon Oliveira, who fought on Contender Series. 11 of his 18 wins have come by submission. You mentioned the guillotine. That is his best asset, is his guillotine choke. But he's a tricky grappler himself, has a couple rear naked chokes as well. Gravely tends to give up his back quite a lot in those scrambles. And you mentioned the wrestling of Gravely. He does have that high level wrestling. He's going to look for takedowns, but he constantly puts his neck out there. Like, he's been submitted, 5 times in his career. And even when he's not getting submitted, there's been multiple times where he came very close because he just sticks his neck out there. And then if he's not sticking his neck out there, he's giving up his back in scrambles. The Brett Johns fight, the De Freitas fight. Like, there's so many fights you can go to where he's just like begging people to choke him out. So that's why I think Oliveira, yes, he's lower level, but he is an okay grappler, and he does have at least decent enough skill set to get the submission win. So I haven't bet it yet because I'm waiting, like I said, on FanDuel to release those props. I'm eyeing the submission prop for Simon Oliveira. I'm eyeing the submission in round 1 prop because most of his, those 11 submissions came in the first round. He's definitely more of a front runner. He starts to slow down as the fight goes on, does have a little bit of Muay Thai, solid kicks as well. But even on the Contender Series fight, we saw him start to fade a little bit. He ended up getting a couple takedowns late. That was important. I don't think he's going to land takedowns here, but like I said, I do think he's live for the submission. So this is one where you can't really go wrong targeting either side. I'm going to be overweight to the fight as a whole on DraftKings because if Gravely wins, we know he's landing 4+ takedowns, pushing a high pace, scored well for his price. And then if Oliveira wins, obviously he's super cheap, but it's likely coming by an early submission. So I'm going to be overweight to the fight as a whole and definitely waiting for those props to possibly take a couple pokes on Oliveira by submission.
Yeah, so those props actually popped up earlier this afternoon on FanDuel Sportsbook. I'm seeing Oliveira by submission at plus 550 and then Oliveira by sub in round 1, 14-1. I know I'm putting you on the spot here, John, but are those numbers that would kind of pique your interest for a shot for a quarter unit, half unit, something like that? Or were you expecting
14-1? Definitely. You're in Colorado, right? Because I checked PA. And they weren't out like right before the show. So I don't know if they're lagging behind. I'm trying to check now to see if because I was literally just checking before we went live. I can
check the PA site.
Oh, no, they did just go live.
Yeah, okay. No, they literally went live in the middle of me like writing up my notes for the show. It's very recent.
Gotcha. So I must have just missed it. Okay, so yeah, Oliveira by submission plus 550. Yeah, I mean, that's worth a play in my opinion. And then you said what was first round? 14-1?
14-1, yeah.
That's definitely. So I would probably, I don't know what I'm going to do yet. I'm definitely going to have action probably on both of those. Maybe half a unit on the first round sub, maybe half a unit on both, to be honest with you, because I don't know how live he is outside of round 1. I think if he gets it, it's more than likely coming in the first. But yeah, keep an eye out on the bet tracker. That's definitely going to be a play in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, so there you go. A little live action on the spot. You can find all our plays, obviously, at ftnbets.com. In the bet tracker, it's free. You just click our click MMA, click the picture of our little Bitmoji faces, and you can see our bets for each fight card. One thing I wanted to mention, 2 things quickly before we move on to the next fight. I think the point you made about the early submission for Oliveira is absolutely correct. He's got 6 of his 18 wins come via guillotine inside of the first round. That's going to be the way he's going to win this fight, because I don't really think there's anything for Gravely in terms of like the competitive grappling outside of Gravely just pulling a boneheaded decision and putting his neck out there, which, like you said, he's been known to do. But for the most part, I think Oliveira is kind of round 1 submission, primarily a guillotine or bust, but his guillotine's pretty strong. He doesn't always pull it immediately. He kind of makes sure he has it cinched up on the feet and then will pull guard. I've also seen him kind of transition and mount from that position, so certainly knows what he's doing in terms of front headlock chokes. And then last thing I wanted to say is I agree with you completely on the Tony Gravely DraftKings angle. Oftentimes I think people they overcomplicate or oversimplify, I should say, the correlation between the betting market and DFS for MMA. Obviously, it matters. That's how the prices are come out for DraftKings. The most expensive fighters are the ones who are the biggest favorites. But I think a lot of people feel about Tony Gravely, he's not trustworthy in the betting market. He could be minus 240, and then he has some sketchy moments. He doesn't cover his price or whatever. He doesn't look like a big favorite. But at the same time, this guy's 2 UFC wins. He scored 138 points and then 110 points on DraftKings. So even if the fight plays out closer than the betting odds indicate, Tony Gravely is someone who racks up takedowns in bulk big time, over 5 per 15 minutes, as I mentioned. He's someone who I always want to be targeting on DraftKings, especially if people are kind of scared out by his volatility. So I like Gravely a lot on DK. I'll have a little bit of Oliveira towards the cheaper end of pricing as well. We can move on now to a fight that, John, I think you're really excited about. We were talking about before we got on air here. We got Jack Della Maddalena. He's a minus 365 favorite making his UFC debut against a fellow debutant, Pete Rodriguez, who's plus 280. 7K for Pete Rodriguez, 9.2K for Maddalena on DraftKings in this spot. And John, two guys who, Rodriguez is coming in on short notice to take the fight. He only's got 4 professional fights. Seems to be pretty green, but 4 wins, all inside the first round. I believe he's fought less than 5 minutes combined through his first 4 fights. So small sample to be working off of here. And then Della Maddalena, on the other hand, coming in with a little bit of hype here off of Contender Series, looks really good in his fight. Pretty solid striker, goes to the body, good amount, which I always like, and looks pretty good in some grappling sequences as well. So I'll let you take it away and give your analysis first here for Jack Della Maddalena versus Pete Rodriguez.
Yeah, first off, shout out to you. You know, you did butcher that Jasmine Juice de Vicious, but you killed that Jack Della Maddalena like multiple times. That was smooth. I like that. But yeah, I mean, his Contender Series fight, it's interesting because I actually bet against him. I bet on Angel Luis in that spot, and that was one of my bigger bets on the entire season, to be honest. And it was just part of it was Maddalena looking better than I thought he looked on tape, but also part of it was Luis just kind of did not look as good. You know, he gassed out a little bit, got hurt once or twice in that fight. But the boxing of Maddalena was super sharp. You know, Maddalena on the regional scene, he was the welterweight champ over in Eternal MMA. But it's kind of funny because, you know, he kind of fought a lot of people, you know, sort of a padded record, but even on the regional scene, like he was getting stung early in fights. Like he's, what's that movie with Billy where he gets hit a lot? He's a boxer.
John,
Southpaw.
Okay, there we go. You saved me. I'm not the person to ask about.
I know. And sometimes I just ask questions and then I just answer it myself.
Especially if they're from before I'm born. I don't know.
No. That one's definitely like 2004. You told me to
watch that, and I haven't watched it. But
it's very good. Yeah, it's very good. But his name's Billy, and he's a boxer in that movie, right? But they talk about it. They're like, oh, well, Billy's got to get rocked for the first couple rounds to come back, and he's a comeback fighter. That's literally like you listen to the commentators on Maddalena's regional scene, like that's very similar to how they talk about him because he's typically a slow starter. He is super hittable on the feet. He does have good boxing, but he's one of those guys where he's durable to where he's like, all right, I'm just going to eat 3 shots just to give you 1 power shot. You know, that's kind of how I viewed him coming into that fight. But credit to him because he fought a much smarter game plan there. And part of it was Luis not really being super aggressive, but also he just outclassed him like in pretty much every area. You mentioned the grappling, like I didn't see much of a grappling game from him at all in the regional scene. Looked good in the scrambles, looked powerful. Against a guy that was super powerful in Luis, training at a good camp with Henry Hooft. So he definitely impressed me for sure. I didn't think he was like super bad or anything. I just thought he was kind of a liability with his defensive striking against a super powerful guy. And that's kind of how I view him in this spot. Like, yes, he's a big favorite. I think he deserves to be the favorite, but the price is kind of swelling here, and he's fighting a guy who is, yes, super green, but also super powerful in Pete Rodriguez. You mentioned he's 4-0 professionally, has only been fighting pro for a couple years, like 18 months or something like that. But all 4 of his wins have come by first round knockout. You watch the guy, he's not super technical, but man, he does have power. And I know he hasn't really been tested yet or fought anybody, and it's hard to take away much considering he hasn't fought past like the 2.5 minute mark in any of his career fights, but he's literally just killing dudes. So it's kind of like, you have to respect that power. And against a guy like Maddalena, who I mentioned, like he is hittable. He does start slow. I think there's at least going to be a window for Pete Rodriguez to get that early finish, or at least just land that one heavy punch that's going to test the chin of Maddalena. So I actually played a quarter unit, small stab at Pete Rodriguez by first round knockout. It's 11-1. I just think it's a numbers play. Like, you're going to give me that big of odds on a guy who I know is super powerful, who's facing a guy who I know is hittable and starts slow. Like, I'm just going to take a small stab at it. And shout out to Brandon, man. He gave me a little inside scoop on our guy, Pete Rodriguez here. I wouldn't be surprised if he shocked the world on Saturday and came through with the big upset.
Yeah, I think it's interesting here. One thing I looked at was the under, actually. It's not often we look at a fight at 170 pounds and we see the under 1.5 at a substantial favorite money. I think minus 145 is the current price for the under 1.5 rounds here. But gotta say, I'm still a little bit tempted. You know, the sample size on Rodriguez might just be too small that I don't want to make a bet here because I feel like I'm just kind of betting on something that I haven't really seen, both in terms of the money line, but also like, what if he's facing someone who isn't completely terrible? And that's not a knock on the guy. You fight the guys in front of you. He's obviously put on performances, has beat Rodriguez, that have gotten him to the UFC after just 4 fights. He's exciting, throws with power. I also think he puts together pretty nice combinations, has decent hand speed as well. When I saw that Maddalena was this type of price, I kind of figured they were just bringing in someone on short notice who is going to be like the sacrificial lamb. This is a guy coming out of Australia. They might want to build him up a little bit. Looked really good on Contender Series, had a little bit of hype behind him. But I don't know if Pete Rodriguez is necessarily like a super stiff test, but he's an unknown for sure. He's got less than 5 minutes of cage time. I just think, if the fight gets out of the first 2 minutes, does Rodriguez slow down big time? Does he have good cardio? Is he able to go to a takedown? We saw him get a takedown, I think, in his last fight on the regional scene prior to making the UFC. So just a lot of unknowns here. Slightly tempted by the under, but I think I'm probably just going to enjoy the violence on Saturday night and kind of use the information we see between these two guys to make assessments moving forward, because hopefully we get a little bit better idea for where Pete Rodriguez stands in terms of the UFC echelon. And I think Jack Della Maddalena has a pretty good skill level, and we'll see how far it could take him at 170 pounds. Let's move on to the next fight, which also features a debutant here. And this one, a favorite again, coming off of Contender Series. You got Michael Morales. He's minus 125, $8.2 thousand on DraftKings. He takes on Trevin Giles, who comes back a little bit better than even money. I see plus 105s out there, even a plus 115 for Trevin Giles. DraftKings prices are super close here. 8.2K for Morales, 8K for Giles. As I always mention on these fight cards with 13, 14, 15 fights, when the player pool is super big and we have 2 fighters who are priced right next to each other, if you have a strong take on the fight, this is like the perfect leverage opportunity. And this fight specifically, not as much as normal, because I think that most people are kind of favoring this fight to go the distance. I think the price is like minus 180 over 2.5 rounds, or minus 150 to go the distance. But for the most part, in these closely lined fights on DraftKings for these big slates where we're going to need massive scores in GPPs, a great place to get leverage at these fights that are going to be cut right down the middle, right? It's a 50-50 fight per the lines. We're probably going to see really similar ownership on Morales and Trevin Giles. So if you feel strongly about a side, I think this is a spot to take a bit of a stand. Normally in DFS, like I mentioned, this fight a little more likely to hit the scorecards. Not sure there's a ton of upside on either side. I will say that I made my first bet of the card on this fight. I did bet Trevin Giles just a few minutes ago, about 30 minutes before we got on air here. I bet him at plus 115 at BetMGM. I believe the price is still around. It should be. I mean, it was literally like 50 minutes ago. I like Trevin Giles in this spot. Michael Morales is a young kid. He's 22 years old. I believe he's Ecuadorian. Looked decent on Contender Series. He's a good athlete, pretty decent striker as well. Has a nice calf kick that he goes to a fair amount. Contender Series, he kind of started off a little bit slow. He moved backwards more than we're used to seeing on the regional scene. He was kind of someone who fought behind his jab, moved forward a good amount. But I think this is a tough test for him, and a little bit shades of last week where we saw Josiah Holmes as a favorite in his debut against Jamie Pickett, a spot that, John, you obviously cashed in big time. I did not have the stones to take the plunge there on a guy in Jamie Pickett who I really think is at the bottom level of the UFC rung. And while that might be true, he still got the W last weekend. I kind of have a problem where I feel like I might overrate Trevin Giles in general. I kind of just think of him as a low to mid tier fighter in the UFC, a guy who certainly belongs in the promotion. Like, Trevin Giles has good skills, man. He lands a lot more strikes than he absorbs. His boxing is pretty solid, fights behind his jab. Someone who I have a lot of confidence in on the feet. Where I don't have confidence is his fight IQ. He has the ability to just kind of get out athleted by some guys. We certainly saw that in his last fight. I took an L big time in that fight against Dricus Duplessis, where I bet Trevin Giles in that spot, and he clearly got blown out of the water. I do like Giles in this spot, man. I just think it's a tough test, right? Morales might be the real deal, but he might not be. He's 22 years old. We haven't really seen him fight anyone close to this level, and I'm getting his opponent as an underdog. One thing before I kick it to you, John, that I will say about Trevin Giles that scares me a little bit here is Trevin Giles' best skill, in my opinion, at 185 is likely his speed and ability to fight behind his jab. He's someone who puts combinations together pretty decently. Moving down to 170 for this fight, seems to be in great shape, kind of according to his social media fight week interviews he's done. He seems to be in good spirits with the new weight cut. But someone who relies on speed moving down in weight class kind of adds an extra question mark, because you assume everyone's going to be faster at 170 pounds than they are at 185 pounds. So a couple of concerns with Trevin Giles. His IQ, never an easy guy to trust moving down in weight. But in terms of skill level and just strength of schedule, on principle, I think I have to take a 1-unit shot on him as an underdog against a really green debutant in Michael Morales. But maybe you feel differently about the Morales side here, John. I'm curious your thoughts on him as a betting favorite here, slight betting favorite in his debut this weekend.
Yeah, this is a card where for once, like we're not just agreeing on every single fight. I do lean with the young guy in Michael Morales, but it's not like a super strong take. I kind of like I don't know really know what to think about him. I picked against him on Dana White Contender Series in that fight, and he kind of impressed me in the sense that I was not expecting much. He up to that point he had not fought really anybody on the regional scene, so it's kind of hard to know what to expect, but it was really the wrestling that kind of impressed me. Like he was facing a solid wrestler, took him down 4 times. I thought he was going to be the one taken down and controlled in that fight. So that was kind of it. And one thing that I want to mention too was like what was I going to say? Oh, you know how like certain fighters have like this like weird hive of like fans that like it's just random fighters and they
Yeah,
come out of nowhere and they're
yeah.
like, oh, so and so is gonna do this, or like they have this crazy like inside scoop. So Michael Morales, I picked against him in my Dana White Contender Series video, and there was like multiple people that are like, you're gonna find out Michael Morales is the real deal, and they're like, you said he has shit wrestling and like he has good wrestling and blah blah blah. Like there was all this stuff, and I was like, I mean, I don't know, I'm just going off of what I saw. And then he comes out and he actually like did look much better than I thought. So it was one of those things where it was kind of funny because like the random people in the peanut gallery were actually right for once there. But I just thought that was funny to bring up. But I do lean with Morales just because it's more of like I can't back Giles, dude. Like I backed him in the past. He's so, you mentioned the fight IQ, like that fight against Roman Delite, like I mean, he could have blown him out of the water, dude. He made that
I
fight
think I won on
as
that fight.
close.
I won on that fight.
Yeah,
I might be 1-1 betting Trevin
you
Giles.
did, because I think we both bet him in that spot, and it was like he literally made that fight as close as he possibly could have. Like he should have blown him out, and
Yeah,
that's the story with Trevin Giles. Is like he has good boxing, fast hands, super sharp boxing. He just doesn't let his hands go. Like half the time, you know, that's the reason why a lot of people didn't want to bet Jamie Pickett. And Jamie Pickett is another guy. That fight, he made that fight against Holmes as close as he possibly could have. He
yeah,
should have blown him out. But he pulled the Jamie Pickett. And I could just see the same thing happening with Trevin Giles. And he's going up against a young guy who's hungry, who's willing to do more, and who's still improving at a young age. So it's just one of those things where I'm like, I don't know if I can back Giles. I get it. Like a lot of people are on him. A lot of sharp people are on him. It's just that I don't know if I can do it, man. And I don't really know what to think of Morales. He was better than I thought he was going to be on that Contender Series fight. We'll see what he looks like against a legitimate opponent in Trevin Giles. But yeah, I'm just gonna keep my money safe for this fight.
yeah. Yeah. I'm keeping it one unit. You know, I'm not going too big. And look, if I'm wrong, the Michael Morales hive can come after me instead of you. This weekend, I do like that you noted his age. I actually see 21 listed. I thought he was 22 years old, but this lists him his birthday as June of 2000, which makes him younger than me. And yeah, he's certainly a young kid. That's something to note in terms of his development because the 3 fighters we've talked about debuting already on the card that we've already spoken about are all north of 30. So, you know, it's like we talk about them as if they're prospects just because they're coming off a Contender Series, but they might be finished products in terms of their MMA game. I fully acknowledge that Michael Morales is getting better fight to fight and someone who's likely to improve over the course of however long his UFC career lasts. So I definitely understand that portion of it. I just think this might be a little bit too much too soon, but Trevin Giles pulling a Trevin Giles is certainly always in play, and I recognize that. So I'll keep it to a 1 unit bet here on Trevin Giles at plus 115. Let's move on to our next fight. And I believe this is a fight that we might have actually spoken about previously on the Undisputed Show with Raoni Barcelos as a minus 510 favorite here. 9.3K against Victor Henry's plus 375. As the underdog, the DK prices have Barcelos at 9.3K, Henry at 6.9K. John, do you remember if we talked about this fight? They were certainly scheduled to fight before. Fight got pushed back due to COVID protocols. Can't remember whether we went over it on the show or not, but you remember?
I don't think we did.
I don't think we did. All right. Well, regardless, you know, I went back, watched the tape on Victor Henry a few weeks ago. Came away somewhat impressed. Like, I think he can win a few fights at the UFC level, but striking is good. He's a lot of fun to watch. His fights are kind of action-packed from start to finish. But long story short, you know, we've got 13 fights here. I think he's facing an uphill battle against Raoni Barcelos. You know, Henry kind of struggles positionally wrestling. His scrambling ability doesn't seem great once scrambles get extended. Barcelos kind of can win this fight anywhere, I think. Notoriously a guy who makes the fight harder to win than necessary, Barcelos does. against guys who he could easily tap out, take to the ground. He doesn't seem to do it. He also seems to get himself in positions that lead to fights being just way closer than they should be. Like if he has this big striking advantage over someone, he seems to be shooting takedowns. So Barcelos never really makes it easy, but minus 510, big price. I will note quickly that the other time these guys were scheduled to fight, the line was a lot closer on minus 300, minus 350. But at the same time, that was a short notice fight, so the market wasn't super mature. Didn't have everybody's opinion necessarily registered in it at the time of cancellation. So interesting market here. Barcelos, a big favorite, probably seems right to me. I think the biggest question, in my opinion, is what to do with him on DraftKings. So, John, I assume you're picking Barcelos in this matchup, and kind of what's your approach for DFS or maybe a prop in this spot?
Yeah, there's a lot of fights on this card, and some fights that I think we have some pretty strong takes on. This is not one of them. I think Henry, you mentioned it, like he's not a bad prospect, and we say prospect, but he's like 34 years old. He's been through the ringer, fought a lot of dudes that have been in the UFC or in the UFC, whatever. He's got a solid game. But this is, a brutal spot coming in on short notice, facing a guy who's super skilled in Barcelos, who's coming off a loss after a long win streak. He's going to be hungry to get back in the win column. And I just think he's the more skilled fighter wherever the fight goes. So I'm on Barcelos. No bet for me on DraftKings. I think he's in play, but he's not a priority for me because I could see him. I could see him winning by decision. I could see him getting the finish. I don't really have a strong read on how he gets it done. I just think he gets it done. But obviously, if he goes to decision, he's probably not doing enough at that price tag. So I think I'll have a little bit, but he's not going to be a core player or anything like that this week.
Yeah, one thing quick that I wanted to know in terms of the betting market is Barcelos did open his submission prop like plus 550. I know he only has 2 career submissions, but that seemed a little wild considering the advantage he's going to have on the ground. But again, it just kind of comes down to is he in the mood to grapple or is he in the mood to make the fight a little bit more difficult than it has to be, a la the Khalid Taha fight where I thought he could kind of get a tap whenever he wanted to and chose to go to war instead. That's just kind of the guy he is. He's an entertaining fighter. This should be a fun scrap, of one that I think we'll have a clear minus 500 hindsight favorite in it, so we don't have to spend too much time on that fight. Let's move on to the biggest favorite of the card, a short notice fight that was put together that, despite the odds, I think should be pretty entertaining. We've got Ilia Topuria. He's a minus 630 favorite here, $9.4 thousand on DraftKings. He was originally slated to fight Movsar Evloev, which was going to be a fight between 2 really elite prospects in this weight class, but instead, Evloev pulls out. Charles Jourdain steps up on short notice, coming off of probably a career best performance against Andre Ewell, I think maybe a month ago at this point. And Jourdain comes back, pretty big underdog, tough matchup, stylistically, tough spot coming in on short notice, coming off of a fight. But Jourdain's plus 450, $6.8 thousand. Should be a really fun fight for as long as it lasts. John, any opinion from you in the betting market? And if not, look, Topuria is the most expensive fighter on DraftKings, a guy who has historically scored well, has a style that features a lot of takedowns that we would expect to score well over the long term. But 9.4K is a lot to spend on a slate where we have a 26-fighter pool. How are you approaching the fight here between Topuria and Jourdain?
Yeah, first I want to ask, who in their right mind is Topuria opened at minus 400 or something. Who is oh yeah, gotta smash that number. Now people are betting him at minus 600. What is going on here? I understand the kid's super talented, great skill set. I love him as much as the next guy, but minus 630, come on, dude. Against a fighter who has a pulse, but also Jourdain is a good striker. We saw in that last fight, put on a performance against Andre Ewell. Yes, it was Andre Ewell, but Topuria, yes, his boxing has been good. He's super powerful. Obviously, the grappling is where he shines, and that's going to be a key advantage for him here. But let's just say this does get extended a little bit. We really don't know what he looks like, over 15 minutes because he's just melting his opponents so early. But I do think the grappling edge is super clear. I think he lands takedowns with ease here. Jourdain struggles to defend takedowns. He's around 50% in the UFC. That's always been a leak in his game. Andre Feely took him down 5 times. Desmond Green years ago took him down 4 times. Even Andre Ewell in his last fight got him down once, and Ewell's not much of a wrestler either. But that's just always been a problem for him. And against a guy like Topuria, who I do think will be able to control him a little bit and obviously threaten with a submission, it's definitely a concern. I'm not backing Jourdain, but man, this price keeps swelling up. I don't hate a super small quarter unit play on Jourdain on the basis that people deserve to lose if they're betting Topuria at minus 600.
I always love that line of thinking. I will quickly say we did see Topuria go a full 15 minutes in his debut against Youssef Zalal in a fight where a lot of us expected him to have success early on in the fight. I believe I bet him by first round submission, certainly had opportunities. I think he had like 5 submission attempts in that fight and just couldn't get a tap at any point, but certainly looks to be, a grappler who's able to dominate the majority of this weight class. His stand-up also looks good. Rips to the body really beautifully. Narco Cop, who's been on our show before, we talked to him a bit on Fight Week. I was talking to him about this fight, and he mentioned, Jourdain shells up a lot, and he kind of uses that high, tight guard against the cage. I mean, Topuria is just going to be absolutely ripping the body anytime that happens. I expect him to. One thing I will say about Topuria is, that third round against Youssef Zalal, he lost it unanimously, according to the judges. It wasn't a blowout of epic proportions or a spot where he looked like he was in super deep trouble and was never going to win a third round in the UFC and is a chronic gasser. But like we've seen this guy in one third round and he lost it. Charles Jourdain finished really strong against Andre Ewell. I had Jourdain by round 3 or via round 3 stoppage at like 14-1 in that Andre Ewell fight. Thought we were going to get close to getting a stoppage, didn't end up getting it. But Jourdain has the ability to, fight for a full 15 minutes, pour it on at the end of fights. I do think this is has the chance to be more competitive than the odds indicate. I will, of course, pick Topuria. Draftkings, I think, is a really solid play. I'll have a bit of Jourdain if I end up max multi-entering 150 lineups this weekend. Just has too much upside to not include in your player pool, in my opinion. But should be a close fight. Not close fight. Should be an interesting fight. I mean, maybe it'll be close. You seem to think
entertaining fight.
Yeah, sure. Entertaining fight. You seem to think it'll be a little bit closer than I do. I kind of hope that it doesn't turn out this way, but I kind of think that Topuria just has the ability to go out there and dominate via grappling. I will say the under a little bit interesting at 1.5 right now, plus money to go under. If we start seeing those move to 2.5, a couple of sports books, I think FoxBet, MGM specifically, offer those alternate totals 2.5. If we get a playable under 2.5 rounds here in Topuria versus Jourdain, I mean, I don't know exactly what number I would play it off the top of my head, but if we were to get like a minus 150, minus 160, maybe even a minus 170, like that sort of range, I'd be interested in playing a 2.5 under 2.5 here, because Jourdain just doesn't strike you as the type of fighter who's going to sit back and allow someone to just line his guard. And Topuria's a finisher on top. I expect Jourdain to do his best to get up, and I don't know if he's going to be able to. So I think Topuria probably finishes this fight in round 1 and round 2, but certainly looking forward to it for as long as it'll last. Let's move on here to our next fight, John. We got Rodolfo Vieira. He's a minus 250 favorite-ish, comes down to minus 225 at this point in the market. He's $9,000 on DraftKings. He takes on Wellington Turman, who's plus 185 for Wellington Turman. $7,200 on DraftKings. And look, Vieira was big time exposed in his fight against Anthony Fluffy Hernandez last year, where he came out guns ablaze in the first round, goes to his classic, power double leg early in the fight, gasses out badly in round 2, loses via anaconda choke to Fluffy Hernandez in that spot, bounces back with the win over Dustin Stoltzfus earlier this year, or I should say late last year, now that we're in 2022. Vieira is someone who I think was exposed to some point, but is still getting a lot of market respect here against a guy in Wellington Turman who, I talked about having a Trevin Giles problem where I overrate him compared to the market. I think I might have a Wellington Turman problem. I bet him I actually faded him with Andrew Sanchez, so I won that. Definitely bet him against Bruno Silva, where he got brutally knocked out from guard in the first round. So a fight where I've actually been on both sides of Wellington Turman. I have historically liked him. I like him a little bit this weekend. I think I'm going to lay out the reasons why for a second. But John, I wanted to let you go first on this fight just before I give my breakdown for Vieira versus Turman, because I feel like I got it in pretty early here on Turman, and my opinion might be a little bit clouded by the odds I bet him at, as opposed to the current market where he's now plus 185. So I'm curious kind of what you make of the current market versus Vieira and Turman, and then I'll kind of give my breakdown for the fight and why I'm backing Wellington Turman here as a pretty big underdog.
Yeah, I'm considering taking the plunge with you, but I don't know if I can lose more money on Wellington Turman. You mentioned that Bruno Silva fight. I was on him there, money line. I think I had a prop on him as well. Fight before that, I think I didn't bet him against Andrew Sanchez. I think I had him on DraftKings or something. Like, the guy's just burned me one too many times. Then you look at the Sam Alvey fight, like he just doesn't do enough in that fight. Like, I don't know, man. Like, I get it, because Rodolfo Vieira like has some serious concerns. Obviously, he's a high level black belt, but outside of early subbing guys, like, there's some big red flags. He's super hittable, doesn't like to be hit, seems to get hurt when he gets hit. And then the obvious concern is the cardio issue. Like outside of round one, and even like there's been fights where he's like not even doing much in round one. And then you look and it's like 3 minutes in and he's like huffing and puffing already. Like the guy just does not have the cardio. And I know he ended up getting the 3rd round sub against Dustin Stoltzfus, but let's be honest, like he should have ended that in round one. I don't know, man. There's super like red flags for me on both sides. So right now, the only thing I played is fight doesn't go the distance. I actually parlayed that with Jack Della Maddalena versus Pete Rodriguez. Fight ends by KO. So I have fight ends by KO in that fight earlier, and then this fight doesn't go the distance. I parlayed them together for a unit at -112. So that's all I have right now. Like I said, I'm considering going with you on the Turman side, just because I do think he is the side, just with all the obvious concerns of Vieira. But I feel like if I bet him, then he just gets knocked out or submitted like instantly, because the knockout I think is live. And I think most people are expecting like submission because that's Rodolfo Vieira's game. But, we've seen him swing heavy shots, and we know the Turman chin is made of glass. So I actually don't think that's out of the realm of possibility. FanDuel opened it up at +850. I considered placing like a quarter unit on it, but didn't get to it fast enough. It dropped to +700. I wouldn't bet it there for what it's worth, but yeah, I kind of think finish on either side is live. So I think +200-ish on the dog is perfectly fine. But yeah, excited to hear your breakdown, and let's see if you can convince me to lose more money on our guy Wellington Turman this week.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see if I can convince you to lose more money on Wellington Turman. I certainly will be taking the plunge myself. I got involved at about +245 for a unit, and then a little bit more. I added a half unit at about +235. I believe or +230. The average price I have is a unit and a half at +232. I actually have a slightly better numbers, but that was what was best available in terms of widely available track line. So I just tracked it at that. I kind of have a little bit closer to +242 than 232, but regardless, I'm on the Wellington Turman side here. As a pretty sizable underdog to Rodolfo Vieira, who, look, Vieira, I think he's pretty skilled at what he does, right? He has a really strong power double leg. He goes to it in almost every single fight, gets guys to the ground. It's really strong on top, has the ability to kind of Safarov fight, the Pihota fight, early submissions in those fights. The Pihota fight went to round 2, late in round 2, actually, but to the point where Vieira is, the point of what I'm trying to say is Vieira is very dominant when he gets in top control. Someone who's super highly regarded in terms of his BJJ ranks outside of MMA. In MMA, it's kind of crafted a decent takedown game to get himself to the ground. We see a lot of guys come to MMA transitioning from purely BJJ and then struggle to get the fight to the ground. That's not really something that I've seen with Vieira. He has the ability to do so. The thing here is, Wellington Turman's a capable grappler himself. He's never been submitted. Glover Teixeira's in his corner. I don't think he's quite the same level of BJJ player as Rodolfo Vieira is, because I'm not sure there are really anybody in the UFC that might have those kind of accolades outside of MMA. But Turman usually has pretty strong IQ when the fight goes to the ground. He's got decent takedown defense. He's never been taken down. Granted, he's mostly been in spots where he would be trying to take down the other guys opposed to fighting off takedowns himself. But Turman's a good grappler, man. He had success against Carl Roberson, who everyone has success against. Marcus Perez, he got the fight to the ground a bunch of times. Obviously, the Sanchez and Silva fights, he got exposed for being pretty fragile, which I think you made a good point about, John. The KO for Vieira, I think it's more live than some people seem to think if he's just going to purely grapple. But the Sam Alvey fight, I was at that fight. I didn't think that Turman looked half bad in that fight. I thought he won pretty clearly 30-27 outside of the double point deduction late in the fight for multiple fouls in the 3rd round. But Turman is someone who I trust to survive on the ground. And then when it's on the feet, everyone's talking, and this is the real narrative that I think is wrong regarding this fight. Everyone keeps talking about how Rodolfo Vieira is getting better and better at striking. And while I acknowledge that his jab is getting better, his biggest problem to me has never really been his striking offense, because you don't need great striking offense if you can just double leg anybody you want through the cage, take him down, get on top, and hit him with an arm triangle choke in about 30 seconds combined. The biggest issue with him is Vieira is so stiff and he eats punches with his face. I mean, in his UFC career, he's landed 61 significant strikes over the course of 4 fights. And in his last fight alone, that's 61 distance strikes. So fights where he's not on the ground, because when you're on the ground, it's like one-way traffic. We don't really need to acknowledge those in terms of the strike count on the feet. But in his last fight, he absorbed 64 strikes just in that fight alone. So he's absorbed more strikes at distance in his last fight than he has landed in his 4 UFC fights combined. Someone who, despite his cardio improving, despite his jab getting better, is still basically a walking punching bag on the feet. And Wellington Turman is not someone who necessarily makes people pay with a ton of power or even a ton of output on the feet. And the reason why I think Turman deserves to be an underdog, why I acknowledge the fact that him being lined as an underdog is correct, because we're betting on a guy who's primarily a grappler who's going to need to win this fight via cardio and stand up, which he's never really done before. So I acknowledge that that is something that Turman has not done and we're going to need him to do to get the win. But man, I just do not know how we can make Rodolfo Vieira a minus 250 favorite in this spot when we know he's got one round of cardio, one takedown, which is a double leg, very good takedown at that, and one strike, which is his jab. I mean, he really doesn't throw combinations. He hasn't really been able to put damage on opponents the second and third round in his UFC career. I just think he's a very one-dimensional guy, and while he does that dimension really well, so does Wellington Turman. The things I'm more concerned about with Wellington Turman are guys like Bruno Silva, really just insane athletes who carry a ton of power and are able to hurt him badly from traditional positions, from a non-traditional positions in that fight. Like Turman really struggled against guys who are freak athletes, and I don't really think that. Yeah, Rodolfo Vieira certainly looks the part, but in rounds 2, is this guy like really some elite athlete? Yeah, he's strong. He can get you with the double leg, but from what I've seen with Rodolfo Vieira, I just don't know how he can make him a minus 250 favorite here. So I won't ramble on any longer, but I've got a unit and a half here on Wellington Turman as a dog, plus 232 is the average price. And look, I think he's better than the market's giving him credit for. Market has come in a little bit. I see like a plus 175 out there now. Not sure if I'd play that myself, but John, maybe I talked you into it. So maybe you'll get involved at those price tags, but not sure. There's my Moreno Wellington Turman. He's my biggest play of the week so far, and hopefully he comes through as a big underdog on Saturday night.
Yeah, I love it. I might be sold there. I'll get back to you on that. We'll see. But definitely some solid points though. I agree with basically everything that you said. The only thing that I forgot to mention is like I agree with you. I think we're relying on Turman to win it on cardio and stand up. The issue is like he's always looking to clinch. Like even when he's not looking to grapple, like if he does that here, like I could just see like a takedown against the fence, something like just putting himself in a spot where we don't want to see him and doing it like right away in round 1 or something like that. But at plus 200, you kind of just live with those outlier decisions, I guess, fight IQ decisions on.
You've got room for your fighter to be an idiot a lot more at plus 250 than you do at minus 250, basically is what it comes down to. And Rodolfo Vieira is known for making a ton of high IQ decisions in his own right. Let's keep moving on. We got 4 fights to go here on the main card for UFC 270. We've got 2 more fights to go, and then we'll hit the 2 title fights, of course, towards the end of the show. Next up, we got Said Nurmagomedov. He's a minus 200 favorite here, $8.6 thousand against on DraftKings against Cody Stamann, who's plus 170, 7.6K for Cody Stamann. And John, I got to give my voice a rest after going to bat there for Wellington Turman. So I'll let you go first here. We both have a play on this fight, you in the prop market, me straight on the money line, but similar lines of thinking, I believe. So curious your thoughts here and talk us through your bet on Nurmagomedov versus Stamann.
No, I actually played the money line as well at plus 168. Okay. Cody Stamann side. I think you probably thought that because I said like when the decision prop comes out, I'll probably bet it. But that was before. That was early on in the week before I really taped it and looked into things. I thought I was going to be more confident in Cody Stamann than I am. Like, yes, I do think plus 170 range is warranted for a play on Stamann. And I mentioned I bet him for a unit at plus 168. But I also think like there are concerns here. Like I thought I was going to be really confident in Cody Stamann. I think he could mix in the wrestling. He's a guy who's always fought a pretty decent level of competition. Been competitive, yes, he's on a 2-fight losing streak, but again, some really good opposition in Merab Dvalishvili and Jimmy Rivera, 2 guys that both have, obvious good wrestling or wrestling takedown defense in Jimmy Rivera, and then a super high motor in Dvalishvili with the aggressive wrestling as well. I don't think he's going to have to worry about those aspects against Said Nurmagomedov, but he is going to have to worry about the reach advantage of Nurmagomedov, a guy who likes to fight on the outside, a guy who's super, super quick with his kicks specifically. So I think that could be an issue. Like if Stamann gets stuck at range here, that's my concern. But I do think plus 170 range, like it's warranted because I do think at the very least, he's going to make this fight competitive. He's a guy who historically has pretty decent cardio, good durability, is going to move forward, good jab, good boxing, and like I mentioned, obviously the Division I wrestling background. Hopefully can mix in the takedowns. Nurmagomedov has been pretty good takedown defense, but pretty good, even better at not being controlled and working back to his feet. So that's a concern against Cody Stamann here. But I do think if he could at least keep it competitive in the striking, then the takedowns or the clinch work, or at least just grinding him up against the cage, could be enough, at least optically speaking, to swing competitive rounds. So I do think this fight goes to decision. I'm going to take the guy at plus 170 in a fight that I think is pretty close to a coin flip, in my opinion.
I'm actually, I'm glad you gave that breakdown a little bit, or the background on your play at the beginning about how you were more confident in Cody Stamann, or you're less confident now in Cody Stamann than you kind of expected to be at the beginning of the week after betting him. And I'm actually in a similar boat, almost the exact same boat. I'm someone who I prioritize, something I'm really good at, and I know I'm really good at in terms of MMA betting is reading the market. And across all sports, I know that's one of my strengths as a bettor. We all have strengths and weaknesses as a bettor. One of my strengths is entering the market at the right time, getting the best of the number, something that I know I do well. And I really felt that way about Cody Stamann. Hadn't even dove super deep into the fight. I went back and I rewatched Cody Stamann's last fight, and then I watched Said Nurmagomedov against against Raoni Barcelos is the fight I watched, because that was the other fight where he's faced a lot of takedown attempts. And I made the bet right after that at plus 180. I bet Cody Stamann on the money line for a unit, just because I knew the line was not going to be there long. Like, it just seemed wrong. But the more I look into the fight as the week goes on, not that I wouldn't play Cody Stamann anymore at plus 170, but I thought this was going to be a spot like Turman. Like Turman, I originally played for a unit the same way before I even dove into deep tape study, because I knew that line was not sticking around. I knew I wanted to be on him, and I knew he was the side that I was going to be on when it was all said and done. And then I went back, did more work on the fight, and I added to my Wellington Turman position at a slightly worse number. At this point with Cody Stamann, I'm not adding at plus 180. I'll put it that way. Like, I feel comfortable with one unit. At the beginning of the week, I thought it might be this like massive plus EV spot where we're going to add more, and we're getting this guy just because his last name is Nurmagomedov, who's minus 200, and the fight could be a pick 'em. The more work I do, Said Nurmagomedov, really crafty striker, has great footwork, the spinning attacks that you mentioned. I think he's got Cody Stamann like badly outgunned on the feet. Like, Stamann doesn't really compete with anyone in terms of distance striking. Tough guy, has good cardio, is going to be able to grind it out, push his opponent into the cage, has landed a bunch of takedowns before. Like, I think there's upside here. I think Stamann can win. I would still bet him at plus 170, but not a spot that I'm as confident in now than I was, earlier in the week. I think that Nurmagomedov makes sense here as a favorite. If I was to bet Nurmagomedov, which I'm obviously not going to do, if you're someone who's listening to the show more interested in betting him, I saw him at like minus 200 in the finish only market. So scorecards equals no action. If you're going to lay minus 200, I'd rather have it where only a finish gets you paid in this fight, because Cody Stamann historically is very little in terms of finishing potential, and Said Nurmagomedov has a ton of finishing potential. He goes high with his kicks. He throws spinning back kicks. He'll go to the body with his spinning attacks. Like, Said hits really hard, and Stamann gets hit a lot. As the comment says here from Joshua Frick, Said hits very hard, and Stamann's kind of hittable. I agree with that. Stamann also super durable, which I think bodes well for his money line chances. But in terms of a finish, man, I think the finishing upside is solely in the Nurmagomedov corner. So, look, I've got some Cody Stamann in this spot at plus 180 on the money line, but certainly understand there are angles to play Nurmagomedov as well, and not a spot that I feel quite as strongly as I do about the rest of my bets on the card. John, anything here for you to add before we move on to the featured bout here on the main card?
No, I'm in the same boat as you. Like, originally I was like, oh, I'm gonna add, you always give me shit. Like, I have like 3 or 4 fighters where every time they're on the card, I'm like, you gotta bet him by decision. It's like Casey Kenny, bet him by decision. Cody Stamann, bet him by decision. There's a couple other people too that I can't think of. But coming into this week, I'm like waiting for that decision prop, gonna add to Cody Stamann. And then it was like, as it got released and after I did more tape study, I'm like, I'm just gonna let my one unit ride. Like you said, I think plus 170 range is playable, but I wouldn't go heavy, and I wouldn't add on that whatsoever. So I think he'll be live to win, but yeah, happy with my plus 170, and I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, we'll leave it at that for sure. Let's move on to the third fight of this main card. We got Michel Pereira. He's a minus 280 favorite. He's $9,100 against Andre Fialho, making his debut here. Is plus 225 dog. He's 7.1K. Pereira is $9,100 on DraftKings. And I'll be honest, this is the fight that I've actually done the least amount of work on. this week we're doing the show a day earlier. We've got 13 fights on the card. I went back, I watched a little bit of Figueiredo's fights previously. I watched his last fight, that's for sure. I've watched a couple other ones, but not a spot where I've done as much homework as I have on the other debutants on the card who were on the undercard, and I knew that I really wanted to be knowledgeable about them before I come on the show. And I really thought there might be a lot of betting opportunities on the prelims in this on this card. Fiallo, I don't feel as strongly about. He hits hard, but Michel Pereira is kind of becoming like an underrated technical fighter. We knew him as this guy coming into the UFC who would gas out, doing flips on the way to the cage. The Tristan Connolly fight was downright embarrassing the way he blew it with having no cardio and just being in there to kind of put on a show as opposed to trying to win, which, I'm all for marketing yourself in the current UFC climate. Everyone wears the same clothes. Everyone does the same media on fight week. Everyone has the same sponsors on fight week. Like, it's very uniform. I'm all for building your own brand through fighting, through your post-fight interviews, all of that. But you also get paid double when you win compared to when you lose. And Michel Pereira seems to have realized that in his last few fights. He's become a little less of a risk taker, and he's actually become pretty fundamentally sound, especially defensively. I looked at this fight a little bit, and I thought that I might have interest in the under. But you go back and look at Michel Pereira, he's honestly defended strikes at almost a 60% clip throughout his UFC career. He's got 100% takedown defense, just a very sound guy defensively, who's a little bit less willing to brawl than I think the general consensus thinks he is. And technically speaking, I think he's a better striker than Fiallo. I think he's a better grappler than Fiallo. I think he's actually an underrated grappler in general. So can I lay this type of price on Michel Pereira despite the fact that I think he's becoming a more composed fighter? Absolutely not. But at the same time, am I really jumping the gun to play an under or an underdog against this guy? Not exactly. I haven't done as much work, like I mentioned, on this fight compared to the other ones, but it feels like a really easy pass to me at current market. So don't have much else to add here. No bet for me on the featured bout of this UFC 270 pay-per-view card. John, anything for you before we head to the title fights?
No, I'm with you, man. These are spots where I'm okay with passing in the betting market. Sorry, Josh, I know you wanted me to be on your boy Fiallo there, but I'll get my exposure on DraftKings. Like, this is a fight I think you could target either side. Like, if Pereira does come out and have a highlight finish, obviously he's going to score well. Fiallo on the flip side, super powerful guy. 11 of his 14 wins have come by knockout. He's definitely more of a front runner. We have a lot of those on this card, but he does have some power. Like, I think it was his last fight. Like, the dude's like in on a single leg trying to take him down. He just like elbows him in the face, and like the dude just drops dead. Like, it's really pretty graphic, but he's definitely got some power, right? And that's really all you kind of have to worry about with him. I don't think he has much of a grappling game. His striking is okay. He's got like a wide base, susceptible to leg kicks. I think Pereira can pretty much win this fight any way that he wants outside of like a meme style finish. So I like Pereira. I think you can get exposure to both sides on DraftKings, but we'll go with Pereira. And like you, I kind of lean towards the Pereira decision if he doesn't, get super aggressive or whatever. But like you mentioned, the main thing is like, can you trust him at this price tag? Like, based on his history, I don't think you can. So I'll get some exposure, like I said, on DraftKings, but not gonna bet this dude.
I think this is actually a spot where I'll take the opposite approach on DK. I think I probably want to be underweight to both sides. It's like a main card spot. Those get juiced up a little bit in terms of ownership. People know Pereira has been an action fighter in the past, but I kind of feel like he's been trending to become more of an over fighter. Certainly still a damaging guy, a dangerous guy, but and has an opponent this weekend who I expect to kind of push the pace and push a firefight. But I don't know. I feel like maybe we're getting to the point where everyone's a little bit high on the finishing equity in this spot. And I can, instead of taking an over, maybe I just go a little bit underweight on DraftKings. But said the same thing about Jake Collier versus Chase Sherman last weekend, and basically cost me a bink on DK because I nailed everything else outside of that. So maybe don't heed that advice this weekend. But let's move on here, John. We got the two title fights, the reason that everyone is here. Fun card, the first 11 fights to talk about, but I think it is pretty obvious that this card was built around two fights. That is obviously the flyweight title fight and then the heavyweight title fight in the main event. Let's go first here with the flyweights in the co-main. We got Brandon Moreno, minus 180, looking to defend his undisputed title for the first time in his third matchup against previous champion Davison Figueiredo, plus 155 for Figgy here, 7.7K as an underdog. We all know they drew in their first matchup with a point deduction late in that fight. Moreno gets the submission win in his second fight, one of the best moments of 2021 in the UFC, in my opinion. And now they'll run it back a third time. Brandon Moreno will close as a favorite for the first time in the trilogy here, minus 180. I think it's an interesting market, right? Because we saw early on, Figgy had a lot of respect as the champ coming in, someone who I continually tried to fade. Didn't think Moreno was the type of fighter to give him a ton of trouble, but Obviously, he did. They drew the first time. Figueiredo had a similar market, pretty big favorite in the second fight. And Brandon Moreno just outclassed him, like straight up outclassed him to the point where it almost seemed like there was something wrong with Davis and Figueiredo in that matchup. And John, you did a little work detailing that on Twitter this weekend. I just think it's an interesting market to talk about. I'll kick it to you and kind of just give you the open floor. You mentioned on Twitter earlier this week how Figgy didn't look like himself in the second fight. I know you have a bet on this fight. I'll just kind of cede the floor to you and tell me what you're thinking here in the co-main.
Yeah, I'm super excited for the trilogy fight here, and I think it was ESPN MMA or one of those Twitter accounts. They pointed out that this is actually the first time in a trilogy fight where all 3 fights are consecutive. Like a lot of the times we see, somebody lose, they fight somebody else, and then they get the rematch, something like that. Like because of the draw, we got the sequel, and now the trilogy, they haven't fought anybody else. So it's really interesting. So I spent a lot of time tape studying these guys, a lot of time diving into the matchup. I'm like you. I know you're a big fan of Brandon Moreno. I'm a huge fan of Brandon Moreno. I love the dude. Like I'm always going to root for him. But I do think these are specific type. This is a specific type of matchup where I think you can almost never be wrong just taking the underdog, right? Like I think the margins are thin on both sides. I think both guys have a path to victory. But I also think that there's just massive overreactions. Like in that first fight, Figueiredo was a huge favorite. And I think we said on the show, like Moreno, this line's pretty wide. We should probably bet Moreno. And I don't know if either of us ended up doing it or not, but it was one of those things where the line was obviously wide. And then it's like the second fight comes around and then it's like, oh, well, the line's getting inflated. And then now this fight, now it's completely the other way. It's like now Moreno's minus 180 or whatever. Like, I think that's probably a little bit wide because Figueiredo is still the guy who is super dangerous. Historically, one of the best finishers in the flyweight division. Obvious power. Nobody hits as hard as him in this division. And yes, I know Brandon Moreno is historically like crazy durable. That first fight comes to mind because he just ate so many power shots, not just to the head. I mean, Figueiredo was ripping the body with some shots that would put many people out, myself included. And Moreno,
like top of that list.
Yeah, I mean, Moreno didn't even phase him, dude. Like the entire fight, I don't even think he was wobbled once. Like, despite what Joe Rogan said, because I think there was like 2 or 3 times where he's like, "Oh, he's hurt. He hurt him to the body," and like Moreno's just throwing right back.
He slowed down a little late in the fight, but it looked like there might have been a hand injury, and maybe it was like the cardio caught up to him from the body shots. But it certainly didn't seem like Figgy's a big moment fighter, and he didn't have the moments that it looked like a finish was formulating.
Yeah, agreed. But I mean, you have to factor in that the damage was accumulating. Yeah. I think doctor stoppage is well within the range of outcomes here. Like that first fight, there was an orbital injury. The second fight, I'm kind of treating as an outlier because you mentioned it. Like, yes, I know the weight cut was an issue. The weight cut's always an issue for Figueiredo, and maybe they get those things squared away. He's been training with Henry Cejudo, made the move to Arizona. Maybe they get the weight under control. Supposedly they have the weight under control. We'll see on Friday and see leading up to the fight on Saturday, see how he looks. But it was just a totally different version of him. Historically, he's always been not super high volume, but at least aggressive, right? Like usually owning the center of the octagon, looking to land those big power shots like he did in that first fight. The second fight, it looked like he didn't even want to be there, just kind of going through the motion, even in the scrambles. Like the scrambles in the first fight, watch the scrambles in the grappling in the first fight and then watch it in the second fight. Like it's a totally different fighter. He's like lackadaisical in the second fight. He has like no interest of doing anything. When in the first fight, it was like, it was an urgency to work back to his feet. It was like, even when he was on his back, it was like he was powerful enough to pull the Derek Lewis and just like stand up. And in the second fight, it was just like, oh, he took me down. Oh, he took my back. Like, oh, yep, he sank in a choke. Like he just, it was weird, man. Like I'm kind of just treating that as an outlier just based on the career of Davis and Figueiredo, but also in the back of my mind, it's like, well, he is like 34 years old now. Like maybe he's just starting to fade. We've seen that, from other fighters, not really this early, but that's kind of in the back of my mind as well. But I do think, obvious competitive fight. Like I said, I think you can never be wrong in these type of fights, taking the dog money. And I did take the dog money. I did in the form of inside the distance, which in hindsight looks like a bad bet because I bet it at plus 195, Figueiredo to finish. And now basically the entire market moved against me. And this is another spot where I don't think I'm going to add to it because I bet it for 2 units at plus 195. And I'm kind of okay with just 2 units. I don't know if I want to add a 3rd unit, even though it's moved against me quite a bit. But I do think he finds a finish. I know Moreno's historically been durable, but you know as well as I do, people who cast iron chin, that only takes you so far. Like even Shane Burgos and other guys, like they may like you just, they have great durability. They can always take those shots and then the chin just goes. So, and like I said, I think a doctor stoppage is also within the realm of possibility. I think a club and sub is within the realm of possibility. I know Moreno's never been finished, but he was subbed by Pantoja on the
Ultimate Fighter.
Ultimate Fighter. Yeah. And, was that the Spanish Ultimate Fighter? It wasn't the normal Ultimate Fighter, right? Or was it?
Wait, Moreno?
Yeah, was that?
I think
maybe it was. I don't know, but we taped too many fights. But yeah, that's a long way of saying I'm on Figueiredo to finish. I think he finishes here. I think he gets the belt back. I do actually think Cejudo training him makes a difference. But yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens come Saturday. I'm kind of taking that approach with both these title fights where I'm going to take the plus money on 2 historically great finishers, and I'll just see what happens.
Yeah, I think there's nothing wrong with that approach. It's just such a fascinating market for me. Last week on the show, I outlined a little bit of market analysis when we were talking about the main event last weekend between Kattar and Chikadze, how people were saying, oh, well, Calvin Kattar was plus 120 to Max Holloway. How could he be plus 250 to Giga Chikadze? Obviously, in hindsight, they got paid the same, but I think there's a little bit of flawed thinking in that in the MMA market. We talk about it all the time. Like if you run an NBA game 3 times in a row, basically the odds would never change. If you run an NBA game 3 days in a row, no matter what the first 2 events came out to be, you mostly, for the most part, the game is lined the same each time. This is totally different in this fight, right? Because we saw Moreno was a big underdog in the first fight. They drew, but I think we can all agree, like, Figgy was a better fighter in the first fight, should have won the fight if it wasn't for a point deduction. I got in live. I actually bet Moreno live in both fights. I bet him live down the stretch because I thought it was be a cardio dynamic in the first fight. I feel like I kind of got bailed out a little bit by the draw, although I got really, really big prices on him in the live market. And then once I realized, I rarely live bet like this, but once I realized what was going on last time out, I almost couldn't believe that, like, after round 1, Moreno was still an underdog the way Figgy looked. And it's not like Figgy's the guy who starts slow and then turns it on, right? So I got in on Moreno live in both fights, but pre-fight, he was a smaller underdog, but still a sizable dog in the second fight, and now it's flipped. So he's like a pretty moderately sized favorite, minus 180 at this point. Just think it's a super interesting market. In terms of how I see the fight, I do think a few things have changed. First of all, there's a ton of volatility in Deiveson Figueiredo as a fighter in his prime. He's someone who I mentioned plenty of times I thought was a little bit more a champion kind of based on his physical attributes, his strength, his power, his ability to be explosive than necessarily his like pure MMA skill. So maybe that's fading, like you mentioned, at 34 years old. There's really no way to know. Maybe he had food poisoning like he says he did. Like maybe he just had a terrible weight cut, which could be repeatable this time out. It could not be. They're the same weight. He could be cutting it differently this time. Like there's just so many question marks. Ultimately, I think at this price, at the current money line, I think that we're leaning towards everyone doubting the Figgy, like putting a lot more stock into the second fight than I would. I think there's a lot of question marks. I think it's impossible for anyone to feel super confident about where Figueiredo specifically is coming into this fight. But the current odds at minus 180 for Moreno, if we see a carbon copy of the second fight, Moreno should be minus 250, minus 300. But if we don't, I feel like a pick'em is kind of close to the right odds. I will say one thing that I think has changed a little bit in terms of how it plays out in the cage outside of the narrative-y stuff and guessing where Figueiredo is at mentally and physically, is I do think that Moreno got a little bit of grappling going in that second fight. I think he's going to be more likely to shoot takedowns early in this fight, avoid the Figueiredo guillotine. And Figgy has always been someone who's kind of, you're able to take him down, control him a little bit, at least tax his gas tank. He's been 5 rounds before, still explosive late in fights, but certainly a guy who's at his most dangerous normally early on through the first 5, 10, 15 minutes of a fight. So I do expect Moreno to utilize that game plan a little bit. He had success previously. I expect him to have success doing that again in this fight. I'll pick Brandon Moreno in this spot just because there's so many unknowns with Deiveson Figueiredo, but unfortunately, I don't think the line is really playable at minus 180 on the money line. Don't hate the shot on Deiveson Figueiredo at plus 300 inside the distance that you took, John, or plus whatever it is now in the market. The thing with Moreno is The one doubt I have is Moreno pretty much took as much damage as humanly possible in the first fight and still didn't get finished. But at the same time, we could just say, like, hey, if they run the fight back 10 times, like Moreno probably gets finished X amount of times via doctor stoppage or accumulation of damage, regardless. So ultimately, despite it being the third time this fight plays out, and that feels like a lot in MMA, there's so many different ways a fight can go that I think it's just kind of hard to pinpoint exactly what will happen this weekend. A lot of unknowns. So long-winded way of me saying I'll be watching as a fan this weekend. No action for me. And I think I like Brandon Moreno too much to root for your Davison Figueiredo inside the distance bet, John. But I'll wish you good luck regardless on it. Anything else here to add in the co-main event, or should we move on to the heavyweights?
Yeah, we can move on. I was just going to say it's one of those emotional hedges, right? Because my wallet will be happy if Figueiredo gets the finish, but my heart will be happy if Brandon Moreno gets another, defends the belt, and we get another from John Anik saying, Tijuana, you have a champion.
Yeah, certainly like top 5 moment. That and Glover Teixeira winning the belt last year, and maybe Dubronx winning the belt too. Those are all guys who I like to root for. Those were great moments. For sure. Let's move on here to the main event. The two men that this fight card was certainly built around. We've talked about the previous 12 fights. This is the headliner. It's a headliner for a reason. I think it honestly could be one of the best fights in heavyweight history. Right? We've got like this immovable force, Francis Ngannou. He's the betting underdog, despite being the undisputed heavyweight champ. He's plus 130, $7,800 on DK. And then we got Cyril Gane, the interim title, who has pretty much passed every test in the UFC with flying colors. He's a minus 150 favorite. $8,400 on DK. And look, it is a super interesting fight to break down, in my opinion. Cyril Gane in the UFC has basically fought 22 rounds and has not lost a single one of them. He has faced very little adversity. I would almost argue he's faced no adversity. Like Derek Lewis was dangerous, but Derek Lewis landed 16 strikes on the guy through like 15 or 14 minutes. Alexander Volkov landed 115 strikes against him. But Gane was in the lead clearly that entire fight and really was in no trouble in terms of damage taken. Francis Ngannou, I think, is the guy who has the chance, obviously, to put him in the most trouble out of anyone he's faced before. I think it's the toughest test for Gane stylistically in the division. And Ngannou, on the other hand, look, his story, man, I still don't really know how good Francis Ngannou is. And maybe that's annoying for people to come on and listen to the show. And like, I listen to these guys for advice. And Francis Ngannou has fought 12 times in the UFC. And he's telling me in the Brandon Moreno fight, he doesn't know what to expect. And he's telling me here with Francis Ngannou, he doesn't know what to expect. Look, Francis Ngannou is 10-2 inside the UFC. His UFC run begins with 5 straight knockouts over pretty low-level competition. Then he knocks out Alexander Overeem, gets the title fight, or Alistair Overeem, I should say, gets the title fight against Stipe Miocic, gets pretty much exposed as having no cardio and poor first-level takedown defense in that fight, loses to Derek Lewis in like the worst UFC fight of all time, and has since put together a 5-fight win streak where he's fought like 8.5 minutes combined through 5 fights. It's just hard to tell where Francis Ngannou is at. I think finding the X factor, I wrote up an article previewing this fight specifically for FTN Bets. It's free. It's just the odds, a little preview of the fight, and my pick to win, which I'll, of course, give on the show as well. The X factor question here is easy. How likely is Francis Ngannou to bonk Cyril Gane in the first 10, 12 minutes of this fight? I think the answer is a little bit more difficult than some people think. There's people on one end of the spectrum who think Francis Ngannou is the best fighter ever to walk the planet because he touches you and you fall down. And then there's people who say, look at the Stipe Miocic fight. Look at the Derek Lewis fight. Like, this man is very human. If you're able to get past the first 3 minutes of the fight, he becomes someone who's not as difficult a puzzle to figure out as some people make it out to be. I think historically, I have landed in the side where I kind of have more doubts about Ngannou than I do kind of crowning him the leader of the free world. I did lose on Stipe Miocic against him in his last fight out. I think that was easily the best performance of Francis Ngannou's career, and there's like no excuses. I made a bad bet, but Ngannou defended a takedown in that fight, was more composed on the feet, was not swinging as wildly as we've seen him do in the past. Like, clearly the best version of Francis Ngannou is the most recent version we saw. But at the same time, I think stylistically, Cyril Gane was always going to be the toughest fight for him. I mean, even just looking at the guy before his UFC debut, we didn't think he'd be 7-0 getting his UFC title shot without losing a round. But when you look at a guy like Cyril Gane, he moves like a light heavyweight. He's way faster than Ngannou, who typically has a speed advantage in addition to a power advantage at heavyweight. I think this is a really tough puzzle for Ngannou to solve. I'm going to pick Cyril Gane in this spot. I haven't bet him yet. I missed the market a little bit. I took 2 full weeks off, not even really looking at the market while we had that UFC hiatus. I'd like to think I would have bet Gane at a price about minus 135 or better, and we still might get it. I just think that he's the better fighter in this spot, right? And like, The question is, how often does Francis Ngannou bonk him? And to me, I don't think that number is super high. Gane historically has absorbed like 2.5 strikes per minute, which is like a +3 strike differential, which doesn't sound like a lot, maybe to some people who don't look at a ton of MMA stats. But that means like on average, Ciryl Gane is on pace to outstrike his opponent by 75 strikes over the course of a 25-minute fight. Like that is a serious advantage. Gane just simply hits his opponent way more than he gets hit. I expect him to win a decision here like 85 to 90% of the time, maybe even higher. I think he's going to win most of this fight until, Ngannou obviously bonks him. I will say 2 concerns I have in terms of Francis Ngannou on the technical side. 2 concerns that I think Ngannou poses for Ciryl Gane. The first one is Ngannou gets really great extension on his overhand, right? I make fun of the guy a lot. Everyone does who's like super into technical striking. He just closes his eyes and, fists go burr and just those wild hooks each way. But if you look at some of his knockouts, like the Rosenstrike fight comes to mind, he's fully extended, like using every inch of his reach. And Rosenstrike, who's a credentialed kickboxer, thinks he's totally out of range of getting hit. And then Ngannou doesn't even have to land flush, and he still carries that natural power to put you down. Ciryl Gane is someone who a lot of the time moves straight backwards linearly, retreating from opponents, and that works against pretty much everyone. But I think if he keeps his hands down the way he sometimes does and tries to outmeasure distance with Francis Ngannou, Gane might be right 9 out of 10 times. But if he's wrong on that 1 out of 10 times, Ngannou definitely carries the power to put him out. The other thing I'll mention real quick in terms of the Ngannou side, what thing I think bodes well for him in terms of the striking is his kicks look really improved. I know there's like this rumor going around at UFC Media Day that one time Ngannou put out Gane with a head kick in training. Obviously, there's the training partners narrative. Maybe John, you'll touch on that. Doesn't play a ton into my stance, but I think Ngannou's going to go to look to kick the calf. And it's rare at heavyweight that someone's best skill is their mobility, but that's really where Ciryl Gane is in terms of his skill set. And I think that Ngannou has the tools to kind of nullify that. But at the same time, man, Ciryl Gane is every single tool I would want in terms of negating a power puncher like Francis Ngannou. So I'll pick Ciryl Gane if the line comes back to about -135. I'll take the shot. But look, I've lost money betting against Francis before. I've been wrong before. Certainly possible I'll be wrong again, but I'll pick Ciryl Gane to get the undisputed belt this weekend. John, of course, I am looking forward to your opinion on the fight. And also, we had a request in the chat. Once you give your opinion for on the main event, we had a question asking if you could hit us with a win a Bitcoin Hail Mary parlay. So maybe a few props you like on the card that people could parlay together for a little bit of pizza money, what have you. And so give us your main event take, and then maybe a little parlay for the people who stuck around to the end of the show.
Yeah, sounds good. I don't have surprisingly, I don't have a lot to say that you didn't already hit on in the main event. It's pretty binary fight to me. Like, you either think Francis Ngannou can land a heavy shot early and put Ciryl Gane out, or you don't. And if he doesn't, then Ciryl Gane beats him, probably however he wants. Yes, he can win a decision. Maybe he could take him down and grapple. I tend to lean on the Ngannou finish side because, I'm not a boring guy. You got the boring guys who like Ciryl Gane to sit there and play the technical game and, kickbox his way to a decision win. Or you like the knockouts, you get Francis Ngannou with the early knockout. So I just really don't think, I talked about it in the Figueiredo Moreno fight. In all seriousness, like in those matchups, I don't think you go wrong with the plus money. I feel the same way about Francis Ngannou. Historically, probably the most dangerous puncher the UFC has ever seen, bar none. And you're getting plus money on him to win by knockout. If he wins, we know that's the way that it's coming. So I'm okay with, if I lose money on that, that's fine. Like, I understand Ciryl Gane is probably the more skilled fighter in almost every single area, but I also recognize the fact that Francis Ngannou has power that nobody has ever seen before. And if he lands clean or even semi-clean, like you said, against Ciryl Gane, then yes, he does have the power to put him out. So will he do that? I don't know. But at plus money, I'm going to take the chance. And that's what I did. I played him to win by knockout in rounds 1 or 2 at plus 185. That's actually moved slightly against me. I think FanDuel has it at plus 200 now. But in what does he have? 16 professional wins. 12 of them have come by knockout. All 12 of his knockout wins have come inside the first 2 rounds. And that's something I think you hit on, is that we know he tends to fade a little bit. Like, if he's going to land a big shot, it's going to come within the first 10 minutes. So I think that's just a better way to improve the money line. Like, I'm okay if you want to take the plus money on the money line, but it's like, do you really think Francis can sub him? I don't. Do you really think Francis could win a decision? I don't.
No.
So why wouldn't you just improve the money line, take him by knockout, or take him like I did by knockout in the first 2 rounds? That's the way he's knocked out all of his opponents. If he wins by knockout, that's the way it's going to happen, is inside the first 10 minutes. So yeah, hopefully we see the knockout win. You know, I give Ciryl Gane, you know, he's super talented. Like, I'm not going to discredit any of that. I give him a lot of shit because I say he's super boring. And everybody comes at me for that. But I just hope we see a fun fight one way or the other. Like when Francis, you know, I try to bet Stipe against him like you. In that last fight, I'm like, well, Stipe's durable. Stipe could wrestle, blah, blah, blah. And then it's like Francis not only defended the takedown, but then transitioned to the back like lightning quick. And you're just sitting there like, all right, this is a bad dude. Like if he's going to start adding elements to his game like that, like, it's just game over. So I'm going to ride with the plus money on my guy, Frankie Murder, and we'll see what happens. But go ahead, because I'm going to look up the odds to try to do this Bitcoin parlay. So go ahead.
So 2 things. First of all, the one drawback that I'm one of the I don't know what you call it, like the virgin nerd who like loves who loves Ciryl Gane, who loves the technical striking behind this guy. But one thing I do acknowledge, like in all seriousness, I know he's finished half of his UFC wins, but he doesn't possess the type of one knockout power that a lot of guys do at heavyweight. And I think that is what will bode, maybe keeps Francis around dangerously for a little bit longer. You know what I mean? Like, Gane is not someone who's going to put him away with one punch. He kind of lets his food hang around a little bit. And yeah, he's, 99% to beat someone in every single distance exchange. But at the same time, Francis gasses out or whatnot. Francis is still around in rounds 3 and 4, which I don't really expect him to be. Like, I think that I'm giving Gane more of a chance to finish the fight via KO late than most people are. Like, I think a lot of people like Gane by decision. I think if the fight's trending that way, Gane's going to tape him to the body and have Francis, taking a knee in round 3 or 4. Like, I really do think that a Gane win is going to like seriously break him, which brings us to our last point where I think the winner here looks super dominant, right? Like if Francis wins, he's going to clatter this guy's head off the canvas and everyone's going to be like, oh, how could you ever not bet Francis Ngannou as dog money, against a guy who had never faced someone who hits as hard as him. And if Ciryl Gane wins, the response from the Gane backers are going to be, how could you ever bet Francis Ngannou when he had 10 minutes to win the fight and then got dominated after that? Like, I just think the winner is going to be very dominant in hindsight. So just keep that in mind. I think the real question comes down to what is the percentage chance that Francis Ngannou wins by knockout in the first 10 minutes. And we'll see how that plays out on Saturday night. And I suspect if it comes to fruition, he'll look like a massive favorite in hindsight. And if it doesn't, I think Ciryl Gane has the ability to really look like a massive favorite in this spot. So I'll pick Gane. You're picking Ngannou. John, do you have a win a Bitcoin parlay for the people as we begin heading out of here?
I do. Yeah. Let me see.
Hit us with it. You don't even have to give us the odds if you don't want to. We can post them on Twitter later.
I got the odds. I got the odds. Don't you worry. I'm just trying to see how much. So about $40 will win you the current price of Bitcoin on this parlay. So not too bad. So, and it's actually kind of believable. All right. So
let's see.
Simon Oliveira by submission plus 550. Pete Rodriguez, my Tucson guy, by knockout in round 1 at 11-1. The Turman Vieira fight, not to go the distance at minus 310. Davison Figueiredo to win inside the distance at plus 260, and Francis Ngannou to win by knockout in round 1 to round 2 at plus 200. The odds are plus 111,314. A $40 bet wins you 44,500 and some odd change. So Bitcoin parlay for the people.
So you win 111 times your money is basically what John's trying to say.
Yep.
He rattles off numbers. That's all we've got. John, if you want to say anything on the main event or any of the fights we talked about before taking us out of here, I will quickly plug before we go. My main event preview came out. We are doing the show a day early on Wednesday, so you could find all my content on Thursday and Friday at FTN Bets and FTNDaily.com. John, I believe your DFS article came out. Plug that and then take us out of here.
Yeah, that's up. The best props article should be up tomorrow. And as always, guys, appreciate the support. If you like the video and subscribe, it's much appreciated. If you're listening on iTunes, hit that 5-star review button. Only takes a few seconds. I'm John Kelly. That's Jonah Shiffman. This is the Undisputed MMA show presented by the FTN Network, saying goodbye and good luck. And we will see you guys in 2 weeks. Peace.